He was mocked, humiliated, and broken, but what he became would shock everyone. Dayton, Ohio is not the kind of place people dream about when they close their eyes at night. On the east side, the sidewalks were cracked like old porcelain, and the streetlights flickered as if they were tired of trying. The corner stores smelled of old grease and cheap coffee, and most people walked with their heads down, focused only on surviving another day. This is where Ben Webb grew up. His mother, Patricia Webb, worked double shifts at a laundry facility. Her hands were always dry from soap and hot water, her back aching, her eyes heavy. But every night, no matter how tired she was, she kissed her son on the forehead and asked him about his day. She carried the weight of two parents without ever complaining. Ben's father had left when he was 9. Not dead. Just gone. And there is something especially painful about gone. At least with death, there is a reason. With leaving, there is only silence. A silence that whispers questions into a child's heart. Ben never asked those questions out loud. He was a big boy. Not tall, just broad, heavy, solid. His shoulders were wide before he understood what that meant. By middle school, the teasing had already begun. In the hallways, boys snickered when he walked past. In gym class, he ran slower than the others, and the laughter followed him like a shadow. He's going to break the bleachers. Save some food for the rest of us. They said it casually, as if words weighed nothing. But words are not weightless. They settle. They sink. Ben learned to move quietly. He sat in the back of classrooms. He kept his eyes low. He answered questions only when called on, though his grades were always near the top. Teachers described him as polite and reserved. What they did not see was the constant effort it took to make himself smaller. Maybe if I stay quiet, they won't notice me. At lunch, he often sat alone, pretending to read while the cafeteria buzzed with loud conversations and inside jokes he was never part of. He memorized the way people formed groups, how the confident ones laughed a little louder than necessary, how the insecure ones laughed the hardest. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people? Ben did. Books became his refuge. In stories, he was not the punchline. He was not the slow runner or the heavy kid. In stories, he could be brave, intelligent, powerful. He read the way some children breathe, desperately, constantly, gratefully. At home, he never told his mother about the jokes. She already carried too much. Instead, he helped her bring in groceries, wash the dishes, and told her school was fine. And so the years passed. Quietly. He grew taller, but not louder. Smarter, but not more confident. He learned early that the world can overlook you without ever realizing it has. But here is what no one understood about the quiet boy on those cracked Dayton streets. Being overlooked does not mean being empty. Sometimes, it simply means no one has yet taken the time to look closely. The world may ignore you, but that does not mean you are invisible to your own becoming. By the time Ben reached high school, the teasing had evolved. It was no longer childish giggles or whispered jokes. It was sharper, more deliberate. Teenagers have a way of discovering exactly where someone is most fragile, and pressing there without mercy. In the crowded hallways, shoulders bumped into him on purpose. In the locker room, laughter echoed louder when he changed his shirt. In gym class, when teams were picked, his name was always last. Sometimes not even spoken, just pointed at, like an obligation. He's too slow. He'll eat all the snacks after practice. They laughed. And the worst part was not the volume. It was the normalcy. As if humiliating him was part of the daily routine. Ben never fought back. He never made a scene. But what those boys did not know, what no one bothered to notice, was that behind the quiet face and lowered eyes was a mind that moved faster than any of them could imagine. In English class, he read novels weeks ahead of schedule. In history, he remembered dates and patterns like they were puzzle pieces fitting perfectly together. In math, he solved complex problems without showing his work because the answers came to him naturally. Teachers noticed his grades. They praised his discipline. But they did not see the deeper truth. Books were not just homework for Ben. They were shelter. Every afternoon, he walked home past the cracked sidewalks and locked himself in his small bedroom. He would open a novel and disappear into worlds where heroes were underestimated, where intelligence mattered more than appearance, where quiet characters saved entire kingdoms. In those pages, no one laughed at him. In those pages, he mattered. One day, I will be more than what they see. Sometimes, he would look up from a book and hear the distant echo of neighborhood noise, sirens, car engines, people arguing. And he would realize how small his room felt. How small his world felt. But inside his mind? It was vast. Have you ever met someone whose silence held more depth than a room full of noise? Ben learned to observe. He watched how the popular boys needed constant approval. He noticed how their confidence cracked when they were alone. He saw the insecurity beneath the jokes. And slowly, something began to form inside him, not confidence yet, but awareness. He understood that intelligence was power, even if it was invisible for now. Still, the loneliness stayed. Friday nights were quiet. School dances came and went without invitations. Group photos were taken without him. He became skilled at pretending he preferred it that way. He told himself he did not need attention. But every human heart longs to be seen. What hurt most was not the jokes. It was the feeling of being unseen despite standing in plain sight. And yet, while others measured worth by popularity, Ben was building something they could not measure. He was building his mind. He was building resilience. He was building a future no one had the imagination to predict. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one no one notices, until it is too late to ignore them. It was late summer in Dayton, the kind of evening where the air feels warm and golden, and music drifts lazily over backyard fences. Ben almost did not go to the cookout that day. Crowds made him uncomfortable. Small talk felt like walking on uneven ground. But his co-worker had insisted. So Ben showed up, standing near the edge of the yard, hands in his pockets, watching other people laugh easily. The grill smoked in the corner. Someone turned up the music. Groups formed naturally, like they always did, and he hovered just outside of them. And then he saw her. Brittany Cole did not enter the space quietly. She moved through it. Tall, confident, natural hair pulled into a bun that framed her face perfectly. When she laughed, heads turned. Conversations paused just slightly. She carried herself like someone who knew she belonged in every room she entered. She was the center without trying. Ben noticed the way people leaned toward her when she spoke. The way her friends laughed a little louder at her jokes. She had that energy, the kind that draws warmth and attention effortlessly. For a moment he looked away. She would never notice someone like me. But fate has a strange sense of timing. Brittany walked toward the coolers near where he was standing. Their eyes met briefly. She smiled, not a dramatic smile, not flirtatious. Just open. Simple. Human. And in that small gesture, something shifted. He introduced himself quietly. She responded easily. One question turned into another. Music faded into the background as they talked about growing up in Dayton, about family, about a documentary they had both randomly watched on Netflix. The conversation flowed in a way Ben was not used to. 40 minutes passed. 40 minutes where no one interrupted him. No one mocked him. No one treated him like background noise. She listened. Truly listened. When he spoke about books he loved, she asked follow-up questions. When he joked softly about work, she laughed. Not at him, but with him. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar and fragile rising inside him. Hope. Have you ever felt the quiet shock of being seen after years of invisibility? Ben did. The world around them continued, plates clattered, someone shouted across the yard, but inside that small pocket of conversation, he felt lighter. Taller. Not physically, but internally. For once, he was not the punchline. He was simply a man having a conversation with a beautiful woman who seemed genuinely interested. As the sun dipped lower and the sky turned soft orange, she gave him her number without hesitation. No games.
No hesitation.
Just a small smile and text me. He walked to his car that evening feeling different. Not transformed. Not healed. But noticed. And sometimes, being noticed is the first crack in a wall you thought would stand forever. One moment of genuine connection can awaken a part of you that has been sleeping for years. The restaurant lights were soft and golden, the kind meant to flatter everyone at the table. Ben had arrived early. He always arrived early. His shirt was freshly ironed, his shoes polished more than necessary. He checked his reflection in the dark window beside the table and straightened his collar one last time. Tonight mattered. When Brittany walked in, she looked beautiful, confident, effortless. But she was not alone. Two women followed closely behind her, laughing as they approached the table. Brittany introduced them casually, as if it were no big thing. Ben forced a polite smile and stood to shake their hands. He told himself it was fine. Maybe she just wanted to feel comfortable. The waiter came. Menus opened. Small talk floated across the table. But something had shifted. The warmth from the cookout was gone. Brittany's attention seemed divided, her laughter louder, almost performative. She spoke more to her friends than to him. Ben tried to stay present. He asked questions. He nodded at the right moments. He kept his voice calm. And then it happened. When the breadbasket was placed on the table, Ben instinctively reached for a roll. One of the friends glanced at him and said quietly, but not quietly enough, "He's going to need more than that." A short pause. Then laughter. Not gentle laughter. Not awkward laughter. Real laughter. Brittany laughed too. For a second, Ben's hand froze mid-air. He felt heat rise up his neck, into his cheeks, into his ears. The room did not get louder. It got quieter. Like everything else faded, and all he could hear was the echo of that joke bouncing in his mind. He slowly placed the bread back down. Have you ever smiled while something inside you was breaking? He continued the dinner as if nothing had happened. He asked about work. He nodded at stories. He even forced a small chuckle at one of their jokes. But inside, something fragile was collapsing. Of course. This is who I am to them. The rest of the evening blurred together. Plates were cleared. Drinks were finished. The bill arrived. Ben paid for all four of them without hesitation. Not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because he had been raised not to make scenes. Outside, the night air felt colder than it should have. Brittany gave him a brief hug. It was polite. Detached. There was no apology in her eyes. No awareness of what had just happened. He drove home in silence. Streetlights passed one by one. His reflection in the windshield looked heavier somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. When he reached his apartment, he did not turn on the television. He did not change his clothes. He simply sat on the edge of his couch, staring at the wall. That laughter replayed again and again. He had opened himself up. He had believed. And in one careless moment, all the old wounds had been reopened. Humiliation is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet and private and far more damaging. That dinner did not just bruise his pride. It shook his sense of worth. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not caused by strangers, but by the people we dared to trust. The parking lot of Kroger was almost empty. It was past 10. The bright store sign hummed above him, flickering slightly against the dark sky. Ben sat alone inside his car, engine off, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. He had driven without thinking, without direction. And somehow, he had ended up here. A place open all night. A place where no one asked questions. Inside the store, people pushed carts filled with milk and cereal and flowers. Normal life. Ordinary life. But inside his car, everything felt heavy and still. He leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. The laughter from dinner echoed again. He saw Brittany's smile. The way her friends looked at him. The way his hand had slowly pulled back from the breadbasket. His chest tightened. For years, he had told himself he was strong. That words did not matter. That rejection was part of life. But tonight felt different. Tonight, something inside him had cracked. What if he simply disappeared? Would anyone even notice? The thought scared him. It was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet. Soft. Like a whisper trying to convince him that leaving everything behind would be easier than staying. He gripped the steering wheel harder. Maybe I am exactly what they see. His reflection stared back at him in the dark windshield. Not just his body, but the tiredness in his eyes. The weight of old insecurities he had carried since childhood. The shame he thought he had buried long ago. He felt small. Not because of his size, but because of his worth. A shopping cart rolled across the parking lot, pushed by a young mother with a little girl walking beside her. The child laughed at something simple, something pure. That sound broke through the silence inside his car. Ben swallowed hard. He realized something then. He did not truly want to disappear. He wanted the pain to stop. He wanted to feel respected. He wanted to look in the mirror and see someone enough. The tears came quietly.
No sobbing. No dramatic outburst.
Just silent tears falling down his face as he sat beneath the harsh parking lot lights. The world kept moving around him. Cars pulled in. Cars pulled out. Life continued. And in that lonely moment, Ben understood something important. This was not the end of his story. It was a breaking point. Sometimes the darkest nights are not meant to destroy us, they are meant to wake us up. He wiped his face, took a slow breath, and turned the key in the ignition. He was still here. And that meant something. The moment you feel like disappearing can become the moment you decide to change everything. The next morning did not feel dramatic. There was no powerful soundtrack.
No sudden transformation.
Just silence. Ben sat at his small kitchen table with a cup of black coffee growing cold beside him. The apartment looked the same. The walls were the same color. The mirror still reflected the same man. But something inside him had shifted. The pain from the night before was still there. The humiliation had not magically disappeared. Yet instead of replaying it again and again, he opened his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. What if this time he chose himself? He typed slowly at first. Online business courses. Hundreds of results appeared. Certifications. Webinars. Free trials. Success stories. He almost closed the tab. Almost. No one is coming to save you. That thought was not cruel. It was honest. And strangely, it felt empowering. He signed up for a beginner course in digital marketing. It was not glamorous. It did not promise overnight success. It required time, patience, and discipline. The first lesson was simple. Basic concepts. Terms he did not fully understand. He took notes anyway. His handwriting looked messy, but determined. The days that followed were quiet. He woke up an hour earlier. Studied before work. Came home and watched lectures instead of scrolling through his phone. He started walking in the evenings, not to punish himself, but to clear his mind. The scale did not change much at first. But his habits did. And that mattered. Some nights were harder than others. There were moments when he wanted to quit, when the old voice returned and whispered that it was pointless. That he would always be the joke at the dinner table. But each time, he returned to the laptop. He completed his first module. Then his second. He built a simple website as practice. It was not perfect. The design was basic. But when it went live, he stared at the screen for a long time. A small victory. He smiled quietly to himself. No one applauded. No one congratulated him. There were no social media posts about his progress. But he knew. For the first time in years, he was not reacting to pain. He was building something. Building skills. Building discipline. Building confidence. One brick at a time. The world still saw the same man. The same body. The same quiet personality. But beneath the surface, change was happening. Slowly. Steadily. Powerfully. Because sometimes transformation does not begin with revenge. It begins with a decision. The day you choose growth over pain is the day your real comeback begins. Change did not happen in a single moment. It happened in mornings when the alarm rang and Ben chose not to hit snooze. It happened in evenings when he studied one more hour instead of giving up. It happened in small, quiet decisions no one else ever saw. Months passed. The man who once sat crying in a parking lot was now sitting at a clean desk in a small home office he had built for himself. A second monitor glowed beside his laptop. Sticky notes lined the wall. Plans. Goals. Strategies. His consulting website had grown from a simple practice page into a real business platform. He started with one client. Then 2. Then 5. Small businesses that needed help with online marketing. He worked patiently, delivering results, answering emails late into the night. Each satisfied client brought another referral. His inbox began filling with opportunity instead of silence. At the same time, something else was changing. The evening walks became morning runs. The runs became gym sessions. He did not punish his body anymore, he respected it. He learned about nutrition. He learned about discipline. Slowly, the weight began to drop, not just from his body, but from his spirit. His clothes started fitting differently. His shoulders stood straighter. His eyes looked clearer. And one afternoon, as he adjusted his blazer before a virtual meeting with a major client, he caught his reflection in the mirror. For a second, he did not recognize himself. Not because he had become someone else, but because he had finally become who he was capable of being. I did this. The meeting went smoothly. His voice was steady. His ideas were sharp. The client nodded with respect. There was no pity in the room. No laughter hiding behind polite smiles. Only acknowledgement. Isn't it powerful how growth silences the same world that once mocked you? The contrast was undeniable. Once, he had sat at a dinner table shrinking into himself, absorbing jokes to keep the peace. Now, he sat at conference tables, virtual and real, leading conversations. Once, he questioned his worth in a dark parking lot. Now, he negotiated contracts with calm confidence. Success did not erase the past, but it redefined it. The humiliation had not destroyed him. It had redirected him. One evening, as he locked his office door and stepped outside, the air felt lighter. The city lights shimmered in the distance. He was not seeking validation anymore. He was building purpose. And the most beautiful part? He no longer needed anyone's approval to feel enough. When you transform in silence, the results speak louder than any laughter ever could. The conference room overlooked the city skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the afternoon light across polished glass tables and leather chairs. Ben adjusted his cufflinks calmly, reviewing the final notes on his tablet. This was a high-level strategy meeting. A new corporate client. A major opportunity. The door opened. And time seemed to pause. Brittany walked in. She looked almost the same, elegant, confident, composed. But there was something different in her eyes. A hesitation. A flicker of surprise. She recognized him immediately. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. Ben stood up, extending his hand politely. "Good afternoon." His voice was steady. Professional. Her hand trembled slightly as she shook his. "Ben, I didn't know you were leading this project." He offered a small, respectful smile. "I am." The meeting began. Charts appeared on the screen. Strategies were discussed. Ben spoke with clarity and authority. He outlined growth plans, revenue forecasts, brand positioning. His presence filled the room, not loudly, but confidently. Brittany listened. And as he presented, she saw it. The man who once sat silently at a dinner table had become someone commanding respect without demanding it. After the meeting ended and the others filed out, she remained behind. "Ben," she said softly, her voice no longer polished for an audience. "I owe you an apology." He looked at her calmly. "For that night, the dinner. I was immature. I laughed when I shouldn't have. I hurt you." Her eyes lowered. "I've thought about it more times than you know." The room felt quiet again, but not heavy.
Ben paused.
This is what peace feels like. He did not rush to respond. He did not use the moment to humiliate her in return. Instead, he said gently, "That night hurt. But it also changed my life." She looked up, confused. "It forced me to see myself differently. To stop waiting for approval. So, in a strange way, I'm grateful." Grateful. The word lingered between them. Was this the revenge she expected? Bitterness? Anger? No. It was growth. Brittany swallowed. "You've done incredibly well." He nodded once. "Thank you." There was no arrogance in his tone. No need to prove anything. The confidence was quiet. Rooted. For years, he imagined what he would say if he ever saw her again. He thought he would want to win the moment. But standing there now, he realized something deeper. He had already won the day he chose himself. As she walked out of the room, she glanced back once more, this time not with superiority, but with respect. Ben turned toward the window, looking at the city below. How powerful is it to forgive, not because someone deserves it, but because you have outgrown the pain. He picked up his tablet and moved on to his next meeting. Because his story was no longer about being laughed at. It was about becoming unrecognizable. True self-revenge is not hurting them back, it is rising so high their past laughter no longer matters. Years have passed since that conference room. Ben Webb walks through the streets of Dayton, now familiar yet somehow transformed in his eyes. His consulting firm has grown, modest but meaningful, with 2 trusted employees by his side. But the true measure of his life isn't in contracts or office space, it's in the impact he leaves behind. On weekend mornings, he meets quietly with young men who grew up feeling invisible, teaching them the lessons he learned the hard way: patience, resilience, and self-belief. He smiles as one of his men struggles to articulate a plan and then suddenly finds the right words. This is why I persisted, he thinks. This is why I refused to disappear. At home, he prepares breakfast, something simple and wholesome, savoring the rhythm of his routine. He looks in the mirror and sees not just the physical changes, the confidence in his posture, the health in his eyes, but the quiet strength of a man who has reclaimed himself. It's not perfection. Some mornings still sting. Old memories whisper from corners of his mind. But he is no longer at their mercy. How do you measure victory over those who tried to break you? Ben knows now that the answer is simple: you don't seek revenge externally. You cultivate it internally. You build a life so full, so dignified, so true to yourself, that past cruelty becomes a distant echo rather than a defining voice. He remembers that Kroger parking lot, the nights he sat in silence, thinking of disappearing. He remembers the shame, the humiliation, and the doubt. And he smiles softly, not in triumph over others, but in quiet acknowledgement of his own journey. He continues mentoring, watching the seeds of confidence take root in the young men he guides. He travels occasionally for work, but always returns to the calm of Dayton, to his mother's porch, to the familiar streets that once felt too small for him. And in these moments, he finally feels the peace he longed for as a boy. I am enough, he thinks. I always was. The world once laughed at him. It doubted him. It tried to define him by what he lacked. But Ben Webb's life now tells a different story. One of patience, of courage, of relentless self-investment. One of triumph that is quiet, steady, and enduring. So, what is the real revenge? It is not a public spectacle. It is not a return blow. It is this: to rise, to grow, to thrive, and to become the person you were always meant to be. To live fully, without needing anyone's approval, without carrying the weight of their laughter. And as Ben steps into the sunlight, taking in the city he calls home, there is only calm, and a deep, unshakable certainty. The highest revenge is a life well lived, built on your own strength, not their mistakes.